You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur.
Come on, y'all!
Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner with The Wedding Biz, and this is another episode of The Next Level, in which I have a guest co-host, and together we talk about the interview of the week and kind of bring out some of the highlights for you all. And if you missed last week's interviews, I want to first mention, Monday I had Kunbi Odubogun, who founded and runs Perfett, which is a wonderful virtual space dedicated to celebrating weddings, parties, home decor, career, and travel. Really dynamic conversation. And then Wednesday of last week, I had an interview with the wonderful event planners who founded the Washington, D.C. and Chicago event coalitions to advocate during the pandemic on behalf of a network of hundreds of small businesses and contractors in the event industry. That is also a must listen. So now, without further ado, today's guest co-host is the return of Jennifer Stein. Jen, hello.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
I've missed you. I'm so glad you're back on the show here again.
Oh, I'm so happy to be back.
Yeah. So for those who may not know Jen Stein, she is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Destination I Do magazine, which can be found in newsstands in all 50 states and 12 countries. And she also has a wonderful online daily blog, so you should definitely check that out. I'm going to give contact information for Jen at the end of this. So in terms of the guests who we're speaking about, it is the interview from Monday, Matt PORTEOUS, who is an award-winning photographer who's gained a world-class reputation for absolutely exquisite documentary-style photography. He is also considered the royal photographer for his work with the Cambridges, and I could go on and on and on with what he does. I mean, Jen, was this not one of just a badass interview? I mean, he was great.
Well, can we just talk about he has the most beautiful voice. So he could have been like rattling off like facts and figures right. And I would have just listened to him for hours on end.
That's funny, yeah.
But the fact that he is so interesting and his history and his love of travel, I mean, obviously that totally speaks to my own love of travel. So I was like just geeking out on his interview for sure.
Well, and the fact that he grew up on this tiny, beautiful island situated between England and France. Can you imagine? Can you imagine growing up like that? I'm so envious.
I'm so envious. And it's so interesting too, because, a lot of people don't realize where that is. Like people think island of New Jersey.
Well, he said Jersey, right? Like New Jersey or something.
New Jersey, like what? And so my ears perked up because I knew where it was. Oh. And I was like, wait, that Jersey? That's so cool. I didn't realize I don't know. It's such a far off place in a lot of ways because it's so small and I don't know. I thought that was pretty cool that that's where he's from and grew up there.
Yeah.
Like what a life to grow up there.
Oh yeah. And to hear about, obviously his passion just was so apparent for photography and for exploring and adventure. And, you said earlier before we turn on the mic, how he immerses himself in the culture, when he's shooting photos. I mean, wow.
Yeah. And I think so many people, they love to travel because they love to see new landscapes and to eat different types of foods. But for him, it's so much more than that. I mean, and if you look at his photography, really spend some time looking at his portfolio, you really see the people, the colors, the culture. It is absolutely the focal point of so much of his work. And and the fact that he's commercial, he's travel, he's wedding, he's all of it. And listening to him talk about none of it was ever he never sought out to become a wedding photographer. It just kind of worked out that way.
It just evolved. Yeah.
And I think that's when you're a true artist. I do think there's blurred lines. And I think it speaks so beautifully to what his life has been like.
Yeah. And I think one of the lessons in this is, we both know a lot of great photographers and, the big ones, do really get into the experience, like with Matt, clearly he becomes a part of the experience. It's not just, and he said, it's not just taking pictures, he said, it's the journey. It's how to connect with people and to help people. And that's what he's all about. And his photos, just are exuding that passion and emotion. There's such an emotional context to every detail, isn't there?
Oh, for sure. And one of the things that he said that just really resonated for me is that, he takes with his couples specifically when he's photographing them, his goal is to connect with them in a way that makes them relaxed. And he really gets to know them. And he says he takes them to their happy place, right? So,
right. I love that.
And he's like, it makes men, specifically men, relax. And I'll be honest with you, I really dislike getting my photo taken. It makes me uncomfortable. I am always like, oh gosh, I hope that doesn't end up on social media somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, I don't enjoy getting my photo taken. And one of the times that I have enjoyed it, it's because I have a connection with the photographer. It's because they disarm me in such a way that, and those have always been the best photos where I look back and I go, I just really look happy, or, I felt a connection with not just the photographer, but the end result. And the fact that he's willing to go with, groups of people. If their favorite people in the world are their friends, he's like, I'll take photos of all of you, and just completely, take out that feeling like you're in front of a camera.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify for people listening who may not have heard the interview yet, is that what you're talking about is he gets them together sometime prior to the wedding, and he asks them, where do you love going on a weekend? And so in terms of you saying their happy place, it's like, where do they love to go? And he takes them there. And like you said, if they have children or pets or their friends, it's amazing that he encourages them to bring them and captures that, because he knows that they're going to be loosened up and have more fun. And then he's got fun ideas for them to do. I think Matt was saying, like, he'll have them climb a tree or whatever it is, if they're not already loose, to get them relaxed. And then that way, the day of the wedding, they're super relaxed. Like you just talked about, being connected with the photographer. They're connected. They trust. They know the kinds of shots he's going to get because they saw it earlier in that pre-shoot. I think that's a great technique.
It is a great technique. Yeah. And, if I were a photographer, my first, I would kind of be like, I don't know if I'm comfortable having, kids, because it complicates. It complicates.
Yeah, I would have just wanted the couple thinking about
exactly.
it,
And he's like, no, bring it, more is better. If it makes you relaxed and happy, that's what I want. And I just think that's a very gracious point of view. And I also think it really comes from a place of serving, really serving his couples. And I think that's just so important.
Well, yeah. And also through that experience of getting with those people, he's connecting with all of them, So at the wedding, I think somewhere in the interview, he talked about how, he'll do this at the wedding as well as beforehand. He'll get to know, kind of get in the middle of it with the friends and the family. And that's interesting too. And I think, there's, from what I understand, my limited knowledge of photography for events, especially weddings, is that there's a couple different styles that I'm aware of, and one is being very, obviously I'm sure he's unobtrusive, but to be more separate, connect with the couple, but then that night to, not even really be known. Whereas he knows people, he hangs with the friends and they loosen up that way. It's just, and I could see that right with his personality. I can imagine if it's my wedding, I can imagine him getting to know everybody, just being part of the whole scene.
Can I just say, I would so have a beer with him. He just,
Well, now let your husband hear about that. Yeah, he's a super cool guy, and that son of a bitch has the looks too. God,
he's pretty easy on the eyes. I'm not gonna lie.
That's funny.
Sorry, Matt, you might be blushing if you're listening to this, but you're not bad looking. I will admit.
Oh God. Well, and then also he's talking about how the other aspect of what he does, there's a lot of what he does, but he photographs change makers is how he calls it. And so there's a lot of work with change makers looking after the ocean, the health of the ocean. And also, this blew me away, rescuing children from child slavery and child labor, and how he will go to India and different places like that and take photographs to capture, what is going on, and also the results of rescuing them. And so he's basically telling the stories to help the change makers through his photography.
And that's just such important work. And you think, it's so tempting to only take pictures of beautiful, positive things.
Yeah.
And to see some of that is painful. But that's also part of an artist's journey, right? And I think one of the things too that he talks about is, is not, especially with, the shutdown and all the things that everyone's being faced with right now is, he's really trying to focus on the positive. And when you're doing that kind of charity work, that's got to be a challenge for sure.
Yeah. And fulfilling, right? I mean, geez. Right. Yeah. And, you mentioned the slowdown. So at the time of this interview and right now today with you, Jennifer, it's July 2nd. So we're smack in the middle of this, of the pandemic. And I was asking him about that as well. And this word is almost becoming cliche and I use it all the time, but I stand fully behind it as much as there is so much difficulty and stress and suffering connected to the pandemic. There's also gifts that are coming out of it. There are, and I do want to use that word. And he used it. We talked about it, just setting aside, whatever financial challenges and other things we have, slowing down. And what we started to talk about, if you remember, Jen, is that, I think I brought it up. We are still allowed to feel joy even during this, I mean, there's the sadness, there's maybe times of depression and all of that, but also we can still feel joy at times during this. And I think it's okay.
Absolutely. And I think, as a parent of 2 small children, I really have to just constantly be searching for that joy. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I am absolutely so lucky to have 2 healthy, beautiful children at home with me 100% of the time. But
my God, oh my God. So glad my daughter's grown up. Oh.
Trying to lead an organization through a global pandemic, it's not easy. I mean, it's definitely a lot. But there are times where I have to really just stop myself, slow my breathing, and go, what is the beauty in this situation right now? Where I'm hearing, Mom,
Yeah, right in the middle of finally finding the beauty, you hear, Mom.
Right. But there are so many nuggets of joy that we can just grab onto like a lifeline. And, some people are having daily, weekly stretches of joy. Others are having to find it moment by moment, but it is there. And, one of the things that I don't remember if this was an original thought of mine or if I heard someone else say it, but if you knew, Andy, that this was going to be a 6-month stretch of time.
At least, but yeah.
If you knew there was a crystal ball that said on this date, it will all be over. We will all resume, normal business practices. All the business you lost comes flooding back in and you can just kind of hit the play button again. And you knew that it was 6 months.
Yeah.
How would that change the way you're living your life day to day?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, that's well, look, in my mind, of course, none of us really know the answers. And I, not to be too negative, I do believe we're headed for another shutdown, probably, in the fall. But so in my mind, actually, I do feel like there's a date. I'm thinking that we'll be back on track in the spring of next year. So yeah, whatever it is, 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, again, it's really mixed. How would I live my life? I think the way I'm doing it right now, I mean, one thing, Jen, and I'd love to hear where you're at too, is that I really dove into the podcast. There are things I'm definitely doing with my music business, which is, totally shut down. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we're doing, working on some new things and various things I don't want to get into right now, but we're doing work on it. But I've really had time to focus on the wedding biz and this other one, the music makers, which is feeding my passion, and at the same time, I feel for you and for anyone who has young kids, it's really difficult. And again, there's stress. But one thing I started just a couple of weeks ago is I'm taking off Friday afternoons. I mean, I tried to do this a month or two ago, and it's really hard to do. So one of the ways to answer your question, living my life, is I want to give myself that time to breathe, which is, again, Fridays like noon or 1. I don't plan anything. I try not to check. I do check voicemail. I try not to, and just have that extra chunk of time just to myself. And I'm hoping that when all of this comes back, that I can retain a certain amount of this, not totally slowing down, but having more time to myself. And not to talk forever here, but what I'm finding is that when I do that, I am getting so many epiphanies, creative ideas that I then apply either to the music, to the podcast. And often they come on those Friday afternoons that I finally just started to give myself. And so even though I'm taking that time off, it's actually leading to better business for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's a good, if we knew that there was going to be an end point, like we knew for sure there was a crystal ball and we knew for sure this was going to be, I think people would relax more. When I think of it that way, like we don't know when this is all going to come to an end. And I think if we did, we would treat our day to day differently. And for me, if I sit there and try and go, well, when is this going to end? And how am I going to change and anxiety starts creeping in. And you and I've talked about the fact that we both suffer from anxiety. This is a breeding ground for more anxiety. And I think for me, it's been a really good mind shift in saying, well, if it's over in a week, like what am I going to do differently with that week? Or if it's over in a month, what am I going to do differently with that month? You know what I mean? And so we don't know. And what I've been doing, what it's forced me to kind of do is just appreciate the quiet, appreciate this balance. I feel like it's almost like a recalibration of everything.
Yeah.
And that there's some beauty in that. There's some goodness in that, like you were saying. And I think also what Matt was saying, all this just sitting around waiting. Like, what can you do when you're waiting? And if we're waiting for it to be over, we don't know when that's going to happen. So instead of stressing, like he was saying, he was stressing before and now he's appreciating. Now he was burnout before and he's able to breathe now.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was an interview I did. I mean, there's several people I could be saying this about, but I had Colin Cowie on the show again a few weeks ago, something like that. It was just a conversation with him about a half hour. And I had said to him, I remembered that in a previous interview with him, because this is his third time, that he said that he wakes up and he's going like 1,000 miles an hour from the moment he wakes up to very late at night, like day after day after day after day. And I asked him, what are your days like now? What do you feel like now, given what's going on? And he said, I have gone from 1,000 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour. And that aspect of it, he wasn't saying he's happy there's a pandemic, but he's enjoying himself. He's doing more cooking again. And he's doing all these, like many of us, Zoom calls and Skype calls with friends. And he's talking to his sister constantly. And he never had time before. He was always on an airplane. And, he's soaking it up. And he's also working on new ideas. And he's going to announce some changes coming up, really cool ideas. But, I think it is a chance for all of us to really reflect, isn't it? And
it really
like you
is.
say, to reset, and may as well, again, I really feel for those of us, and I have challenges too with the finances around this. So I'm not knocking what can be extremely stressful, but at the same time, it's okay to also have moments of being relaxed and reflecting and trying to balance all the feelings if possible.
And I also think it's kind of interesting that the Black Lives Matter movement is happening now, because I think this is also a time where people are able to sit and reflect and see their part in it. For me, it's been a really phenomenal learning lesson that, before I was anti-racist, which is super important, but now it's pushing me to be an ally and really, especially as a media outlet, and recognizing some of the areas that we have just really, missed the mark. And, I think when you look at all these areas of recalibration and of introspection, it's so important. And I think to just constantly be worrying about the money and anxiety, and we're missing something. There's so much more to what we can be doing and seeing right now. And we have an opportunity, and I don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss it. And I hope other people don't miss it.
Yeah, I agree. There is. And I want to say too out loud, around the protests and all of that's going on, it's gotten me to reflect further. I mean, I've always been really concerned about this, and I feel closer to it. I'm dealing with a lot of Black people in my bands, and I was in the band for decades, and so I feel even closer to it. I mean, my friends, being affected and having these conversations that I've never had before with people I've been so close to for so long. I like that it is bringing reflection. And look, I also say too, I admit this on the show, I just was not aware at how few people of color that I've had on the show. It was not intentional at all. But then when I look at it, so I've put out way more effort and I'm bringing in more people of color, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm sorry that it took this issue for it to come front of mind for me. But on the other hand, it's taking all these difficult situations, the pandemic and what's going on with the protests, to put this in front of us and give us a chance to reflect on so many just hugely deep issues of importance.
Right.
Well, gosh, this was turned into a great conversation, Jen. I thank you for being on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. And I loved listening to Matt's interview. I mean, he's just such a phenomenal talent. And we didn't even talk about the fact that I guess you touched on it before about him being a photographer for the royal family and how humble he is about it. He's just a phenomenal person. I seriously want to go sit down and have beers with him. I will bring my husband in case that's a problem. Because I'm pretty sure my husband will love to have beers with him too. He seems that cool.
Oh God. Yeah, no. Yeah. Look, those of you listening, if you haven't heard Matt's interview, I mean, every one of these interviews every week is just so incredible. I love every single one of them. But yeah, sit down and give yourself a quiet moment and listen to Monday's interview. So let me give, first of all, Matt's information. And all of this is going to be in the show notes if you can't keep up writing this down. But basically, his different websites are for weddings. It's weddingsm.com. His other website is thestudiom.com. On Instagram, his wedding handle is at @m_weddings. And his personal Instagram is at Matt PORTEOUS. And then his ocean culture life, we didn't cover that. He does a lot of work for the health of the oceans, and it's oceanculture.life. Again, you can find all of this in the show notes at theweddingbiz.com. And Jennifer, your website is destinationido.com. Again, destinationido.com. Please check it out, everyone. And the blog, that would be destinationido.com/blog. And then, Jennifer, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, your handle on Facebook is Destination I Do Mag. And then on Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram, it's Destination I Do. Did I get all that right?
Yes, you did, man. That was a mouthful, Andy.
Yeah, what, everyone, just go to the website or your cell phone podcast app.
Just Google search it.
Yeah, it's all in the show notes, trust me. So, one other thing I want to mention. During the interview, it came up that I do have this Music Makers podcast. It's called The Music Makers. It's got behind-the-scenes stories from the most influential music industry pros around, like Clive Davis. I mean, it's crazy what's going on that podcast. So if you're interested in music, The Music Makers, and we'll catch you all next week on The Wedding Biz.